Okay, so we're back with part 3, lesson 1, part 3. So we've got our server running. We'll take a quick tour of what's here, and then we'll just play around with a little bit. So what have we got? We've got some dependencies. So these are libraries or packages. So we've already got a few dependencies for working with identity for authentication, as well as connecting to SQL Server, which we'll do in a few weeks. We don't need those for today. Properties, that really has to do with publishing to a web server. Under www root, this should be fairly self-explanatory for you front-end developers, right? This is where the assets go. So there's already folders here for CSS. So we have a built-in style sheet we can customize. We've got our own front-end JavaScript file where we could write our own client-side JS if we need. We've got a favorite icon, and we have this lib folder that already includes Bootstrap, jQuery, jQuery validation. I mean, we can get rid of this stuff, but it's already here, which is great. Areas, so we looked at that we've already got a working register and login page. Well, where are they? They're under this areas section. These are templates available for authentication. So there's already pre-built pages for things like two-factor authentication, forgetting a password, etc. Then we get into the MVC, so our controllers. We've got one controller here called the home controller. We can have a quick look at what's here. So we have a class declaration. So this inherits from the base controller class in .NET. We've got a constructor. And then we've got a couple methods here, one called index and one called privacy, and each method returns a view. Our data folder, we've already got a database connection class. We won't worry about this for a few weeks. Models, right now we don't have anything in here except kind of an error model. But under views, you'll notice we've got two subfolders. We've got home, and under home, we have two views, index and privacy. And our view extension is CS.html because our server-side code is in C#. And then we've got HTML as the extension. So here's our home page. And you'll notice we've only got a little content on here. We've got this div tag with an H1 and a P tag. And this, yep, no problem. I'll record the rest of it. I'll upload them a little later. Have a great week. See you next week. There is a quiz in the week 2 folder due next Monday. So we can see this little @ symbol indicates server-side code. Yep, no problem. Video will be posted later. And then, so if this is our home page, it says welcome and learn about. Oh, I closed my project, so now my server's offline. So I need to start with the debugging again. Yep, just a quiz. And it's in the lesson 2 folder. So on my home, here's my welcome H1 and P tag. Right? So where does the rest of the stuff come in? Where does the header and footer come from? Because if we look at the view, you don't see any header, footer. So where is that stuff? If it's not on this page. Yeah, it's in a layout folder. So where do you suppose the layout might be? In shared. Thanks, Jesse. So under shared, we have this underscore layout. So this is our pre-built template that we can modify, and we're going to modify it and customize it. Right, so we've got our meta tags here. We've got a page title, links to Bootstrap and our own CSS. We've got a Bootstrap navbar. And here it includes our page title, as well as our home and privacy links. The main page content gets injected here in this render body statement. And notice also these server-side tags, they don't have opening and closing tags. They just have the @ symbol, which again, much more efficient than having to do open and closing tags. Then we've got a footer down at the bottom. So we can get rid of this layout file, but we typically are going to want to use it and modify it. So let's make a few changes here. So notice the name up here. This is basically the name of our project. So I'm just going to want to change this so it just says lesson 1. So if I go to views, shared, and open up layout, here on line 14, where it says COMP2084 lesson 1, I'm just going to change that to say lesson space 1. So I've just changed the text inside this link on line 14. Save it, and Visual Studio now, it puts a little green mark here to show we saved change to this block of code. Super helpful for identifying what was changed. So if I go back and refresh my browser, that link at the top left of our nav bar, instead of saying COMP2084 _ lesson 1, it should now just say lesson 1. Just go refresh. So notice it says lesson 1. So let's look at the MVC pattern and see, how do we add a page and add a link, and how does this all work? A few other files here, we'll get into them later. Another class, we have an app settings.json. So this will store things like our database connection, or maybe we have API keys, or mail server credentials. We can store them here. We've also got a startup file that does a whole bunch of configuration. Again, things like saying we're going to use SQL Server, whether users need to confirm their account before they sign in, a whole bunch of other things. We'll get into this later. We don't really need to worry about this file for today. So let's go ahead. So in our home controller, let's open up your controllers and home controller if it's not here already. So we're going to make a new method here. Doesn't really matter where in the file, but I'm going to put it on line 31 underneath my privacy method. So we'll make a new method to load the about view. So our method's going to be public, and it's going to return a class. This is really an interface called iActionResult. So it means we're going to return some kind of result. Now, almost all the time in our MVC apps, the result we're going to return is a view. We want to load a page back in the user's browser. But we could return other things, like we could return an error code. We could return a JSON object if we're building an API, which we'll do. We could return a redirect. So after someone logs in, redirect them to another URL. And I'm going to call my method about. Now, the naming convention in ASP.NET is important. Microsoft has forever, since the beginning of time, used Pascal case. So like camel case, but starting with a capital letter. So when I put my method in here, Visual Studio complains because it says there's no return value. Your method doesn't return anything. There's no code here to return anything, but the method is supposed to return. So iActionResult, it's an interface that describes some kind of MVC result. I'll put a comment in here. So usually a view that could be error code. Make this a multi-line comment. Okay, make sense, Mahir? So it's kind of a base class, like a wrapper. So it could be any of these, but most of the time we want to return a view, right? We want to load a page in the user's browser. So in this case, we want to return, we want to return a view. So there's our code. I can actually throw it in the chat, but good idea that you try typing it, because typing it actually helps you internalize what it means. When you copy and paste, you don't get the same kind of learning. So I'll save that. And then we want to try to call this method and load an about view. So how could we do this? How can we test this out once I save my change? How do we test it out? Yeah, so Manjinder, what URL should we go to? Localhost slash, 443. What would the rest of the URL look like? It's actually on my screen. Yulia, you're close. That's part of it. Yeah, it's got to be home and about. Remember our pattern. So the first part is the controller, and then the second part is the method. So thanks, Alex has got it. So let's go here and let's go to /home. And one of the great things about .NET is the URLs are not case sensitive, which is great. So let's go to home about. Okay. So what happened here? Why did we get this error? There's actually nothing wrong with the URL. The URL is correct. What is this error telling us? Right, it's looking for a file called about.cshtml, and first it tried views home, couldn't find it. Then it tried views shared, couldn't find it. Then it tried pages shared, couldn't find it. So eventually it bombs. Right? So we need to have a view to load. So there's a couple ways of doing this. The easiest way is if I right-click the method name, I can choose Add View. Some of you, especially if you're not on Windows, may not have this option. So if you don't have this option, you could go to Solution Explorer and go down to Views and Home, and you could just right-click your Home folder and choose Add a View here. Either one will work. This is just a bit of a shortcut. So I'll click my method name, choose Add View. I want a Razor view that's empty. So Razor is the name of Microsoft's view syntax, using those like the @ symbols for server-side values. And we'll dive into it more in a couple of weeks. So I just want an empty Razor view. And I'm just going to call it, actually, I don't think this is going to put it in the right place. I'm going to try it. I'm going to call it about.cshtml. So the name has to be about. The view name should always match the method name. I'm going to add it. Right, so it did put it in the right place automatically. So inside of views home, I now have a file called about. I don't need any of this code here, so I'll just put on plus. And I can just put on standard HTML. So I'm just putting on, you can put on any HTML you like. An H1 tag and a paragraph tag, doesn't really matter what goes on. So now if I go back to my browser and refresh that URL, /home/about, let's see what happens. So I'll refresh, and now our page loads at /home/about. So creating a new page is as simple as making a method in the controller and then adding a view with the exact same name. So the naming convention is important. I could name my view something else, but then we'd have to specify in the controller what the name of the view is. So I'll just show you how this works. I don't recommend doing this, but just so you understand how it works. I'm going to rename my view for a minute. You don't have to change yours. I'm going to set it back. I'm just going to right click it and I'll change this to about-us. So my controller method is called about. It's going to load a view, but my view name is called about us. So now it crashes again. It says the about method is looking for a view called about. If I, for some reason, don't want to use the same name in here when I return the view, I would have to specify which view do I want to load. So again, you don't have to make this change in your project. I'm just showing you how the naming conventions work. And now it works again. So the method about now loads the view called about us. But this is kind of violates the naming conventions, so I don't recommend it. Yes, that's right, Mahir. Exactly. So I'll just undo that because I want to follow the conventions. I don't like the practice. It's not good practice. Your view name should always match your method names. So I'll put it back. One other thing about the naming, if my method is called about with lowercase, notice Visual Studio is going to put this little border around it and tell me this is a naming rule violation. So method names must begin with uppercase. And it gives me the option to fix it. It's going to rename it. So if you guys have done 2 courses in Java, and Java is the naming conventions. Typically in Java, people use camel case. I know you've taken C# before, so you should be, in this class, you're going to be using Pascal case to meet the naming conventions. Okay, so we can see how the URL pattern works with the method and the view. So how do we get a link? What if we want to add a link to this page? How could we add a link in our nav bar? Yeah, you got to do it. Let's go back to our shared layout under views, shared layout. So here are our 2 links, right? We've got our home and privacy link. I'm going to add one more link, but this link is going to look a little different than what you're used to. So I'll use the same li class equals nav item. So it's styled the same way. And I'm going to add an anchor tag with the same bootstrap classes, nav link, text dark. But if you look at the 2 links on lines 22 and 25, notice there's no href properties. Got this blank ASP area. We can ignore that. What do you suppose these mean? ASP controller and ASP action. So these aren't standard HTML. How do these work? What does the ASP controller and ASP action mean? Right. So the first one is which controller is going to process the link. So again, we only have one controller. Yeah, and close, Alex. It's not exactly the view. It is the view, but indirectly. What is it calling directly in the ASP action? Yeah, it's calling the controller method. Right. So this link, yeah, instead of the link loading a view directly, we actually want to call the about method we just wrote in the home controller. So we don't have to write our links this way. I could just have done this. I could just say href equals /home/about. That would work. But typically with .NET, in ASP.NET, we use ASP controller and ASP action for links instead because we're trying to be really intentional that we're using MVC. We're not just linking to a page, we're calling a controller method, and that controller method will then load a view. So here's our link. I'll throw it in the chat. Alex, I don't even have a good idea. I have never in my life used ASP area. So I don't have a good answer for you. I'll have to look into it and get you a good answer. We don't really need it is my short answer. So now if we go back, notice I haven't even refreshed. The page automatically reloaded. So now we've built a new page and it's in our nav bar. So you can see how easy it is to get a site up and running. We create the template. Even if we're not working with the database, even if we're building a static site, this is still super fast, right? Build methods in the controller and build views and then start modifying your layout. Add your own custom CSS, add your content on the pages, away we go. Pretty cool so far? Jennifer, that is awesome. It does. You can build things so fast and get stuff up and running so quickly. That's right, Scott. Imagine how many lessons it takes to build this. Okay, I have one, well, you know what, Alex, there are MDC frameworks for PHP. A really well-known one is called Laravel. So there's a chance you might use something like that on your co-op. Still not as good as .NET, but it uses the MVC pattern. Thanks, Elizabeth. Or do you prefer Liz? I noticed you mentioned Liz on the whiteboard. It's a self-contained unit consisting of its own controller, views, and models can be used in a larger project. We're having a single set of folders for all. Okay, so if you have a super large, you can kind of group your MVC files. I've never used that before, but makes sense. Okay, Googling is good. All right, we're gonna do one last thing and then we're done. This will just take us a minute. We have a few different ways. I mean, if we look back at our diagram, in my example, right, in this example, our controller not only loads the view, but it also passes information to the view. In this case, it's going to pass order object 1000. We're not working with the database today, so we can pass complex objects to the view, but we can also pass like simple data like strings, simple error messages. We can pass them from the controller to the view in a really easy way. So I'll just show you how to do that, and then we're done for the day. So let's go back to our about method. Before we load the view, we are going to use the view bag container to pass a simple string to the view for display. So we might use this on like a login screen where we may want to pass back like an invalid login message after we validate against the database, and we want that message to render in the view. So view bag is just kind of this empty, unstructured container. We wouldn't pass complex data like an order object in the view bag, but just simple messages, you know, the search result count or something like that, or an error message. So in the view bag, we can define any variables. So we'll say view bag dot current time equals, and we'll use the .NET date time library to just get a current timestamp. So we can use datetime.now. So by grabbing the current date and time and storing it in a variable in the view bag, we can output this variable in the view. So load. So we're setting a variable in the controller, and then we want to modify our view to output this variable. So we can set it in the controller and display it in the view. So there's our code. So we're only writing one more line of code today and then we're done. We're going to go to the about view and we're going to display this variable from the view bag. So I'll go to about, put in a new paragraph. Currently, so we're going to represent a server-side value here. So I'll put in the @ symbol. Not sure why it's not showing as yellow. Usually it does, in my view. That's odd. So now if I go to about, the view bag is set in the view bag variable. It's set in the controller, but displayed in the view. And our syntax is so much cleaner for displaying the server-side variable. I don't need an echo command. I don't need a big opening tag and closing tag. I need this one little @ symbol. Yeah, the Razor syntax, it's easier to read. It's much less error prone than PHP syntax. So you're going to get, I realize MVC is new. So if this seems kind of overwhelming or confusing, don't panic. We're going to work with this structure every week. And probably by week 3, week 4, virtually everybody who takes this class says, I understand MVC, like I understand how the components work together. So it is a different way of putting your applications together and thinking about how they flow. But it has all the benefits that we've talked about. Okay, so we're not going to keep this project. You can feel free to play around, try creating other views. What we're going to do next week is kind of focus on creating our own controller and making more methods in the controller and looking a bit at a deeper level how this works. Marcos, did you maybe start debugging? Or did you do without debugging? Interesting. Okay, yeah, if you have to refresh, no big deal. I'm not actually sure exactly why mine is reloading automatically. I thought I would have to reload it. It may just be a setting somewhere. So for next week, you only have a couple small tasks. So if you haven't completed the discussion board posting and the academic integrity pledge, please do so before next week's class. Okay, so your checklist is here. Introduce yourself on the forum, complete the integrity pledge. We've already done the mural whiteboard. If you're watching after class, make sure you participate in that. Do the little demo we did together. And then where do you find the quiz? So in the week 2 folder, the quiz will be available at 2 p.m. today. And it's available until next Monday at 5 o'clock. It's worth 1%. It's only 5 questions and it's open book. Okay, thanks for joining today. I hope it was a good start. I enjoyed meeting you. Looking forward to reading more about everybody in the discussion forum. Anybody have any questions for today before we call it a day?